happen to know how much money we made on opening week?
I do. It was something around 500 million, but like...
So you're telling me you see that amount of money, and you think we're not gonna make a second one?
How the hell are we gonna make a second one? Everyone in the universe is dead.
That doesn't matter. We got creative writers around here that can come up with something.
The author's only dying wish was specifically not to make a sequel.
Oh.
Well, guess he's not here to stop us. Ah!
The top 10 worst animated sequels. It's a fun pastime for a lot of people on the internet, and especially nostalgic for many YouTubers. Everyone gets together to discuss the worst follow-ups to animated classics. The bottom of the barrel when it comes to unwanted sequels of movies that were already perfect standalone stories on their own. It's practically an ancient tradition that we do time and time again as we rip into these pathetic cash grabs that make a mockery of classic characters and stories. From the endless library of direct-to-home Disney sequels to Shrek the Third. There really was no shortage of shoehorn sequels that were squeezed out of companies in an attempt to maximize profits. And it's really no secret how bad these movies are because so many people have made this type of list already. On YouTube, DeviantArt, every website where you can rant about these movies, it's been done. So you might be wondering why make a video on this topic in 2025 when it's already been done by so many people. Well, a lot of time has passed since the old days of making worst animated sequels lists, and in that time, we got way more sequels to pile into that landfill. New attempts at ruining classic films to exploit nostalgia. And I think several of these new ones deserve to be put in the limelight when going over this subject. Of course, there's definitely sequels of the dark times that remain so bad that they're still next level, so I guess you can expect some old stuff mixed in with the new. But there will be an important rule of thumb to go over before we start. To make sure this list is as diverse as possible, I'm going to make it so that only one movie per franchise can make it on this list. For example, you won't be seeing both Ice Age 4 and 5 on this list. Trust me, this is something that needs to be done because without this rule, Disney would take up like half of this list. So with that established, let's get this countdown of animated horror started. What are the worst animated sequels in 2025? Well, let's find out.
He's right! There really is a comet headed towards Earth!
Oh, Blue Sky, you were done so dirty by Disney. You weren't always perfect, but you still gave us some really fun movies. From Peanuts to Rio to Spies in Disguise, all the way back to the original Ice Age. This movie was so much better than it had any right to be, as it was the first major motion picture the studio put out to compete with Disney and DreamWorks. A surprisingly engaging and endearing cast of characters, a well-paced and laid out story, interesting themes regarding humanity's slow but inevitable advancement as a species dominating the previously unchallenged animal kingdom, and a very down-to-earth sense of heart and humanity. All these things and more were not present in the shitty sequels you put out in an attempt to capitalize on its popularity, with Ice Age Collision Course being the worst one of all. And yes, I am aware they're working on a 6th movie, but I decided I didn't want to wait that long to make this list. And if it ends up being worse, then oh well. All the characters are completely deprived of their likability, with them having no personality or their worst traits being flanderized through the roof. From Sid being an incompetent bonehead, to Crash and Eddie being horrible comic relief. Diego and his girlfriend have no characteristics and contribute nothing to the story, so they might as well not be here. Manny is character assassinated by having him being both an overbearing parent and a bad husband who doesn't remember his anniversary with his wife. The bottom of the barrel of done-to-death sitcom cliches. Buck doesn't do anything memorable or worth watching the movie for, so he's basically just here for fan service, and the quips from Sid's grandma get really annoying really fast. And the new characters they introduce aren't any better. All of them are deprived of any worthwhile personality, making them annoying background noise. The worst being the absurdly stupid villains and their asinine plan to stop the heroes from destroying the meteor, just because they think flying animals will be immune to the asteroid's collision with the planet. Putting aside the absurdity that these retards think they'd be protected from an asteroid strike that would wipe out all life globally, what do they even have to gain from this? Even if they had some dumb plot armor that saved them from dying, the asteroid would still destroy all life. They'd be ruling over nothing but a desolate wasteland. And this whole scheme by the villains is only a factor of the movie's biggest problem, its completely absurd plot. When Ice Age started, it was a lighthearted, down-to-earth story about some animal friends reuniting a baby with his family. A simple but relatable storyline that never got too ridiculous. But ever since the second movie, the Ice Age franchise feels the need to dial up the stakes way past 11, turning the series into a wannabe epic thriller to save the world from numerous threats. First there was the Flood, then the return of the dinosaurs, then the continental shift. And now it's a giant asteroid threatening to destroy the Earth. But give some credit to the previous Ice Age sequels. At least the threats had a natural relationship with their world. The Flood, dinosaurs, and continental shift were native to the Earth, making them annoying but excusable enough. But when it gets to the point of throwing aliens into the mix, with Scrat coming across an alien spaceship causing an asinine domino effect resulting in an asteroid going on a collision course with the Earth, now it's getting out of control. Even when compared to the other sequels, this movie is so badly removed from the grounded and down-to-earth tone that was established in the first movie. The Ice Age series has done the whole end-of-the-world plot so many times at this point that it's completely lost any sense of tension. It's just creatively bankrupt to the point of running Blue Sky into their graves. Literally. It doesn't continue the story of any of the characters in a meaningful way, the comedy is an assault on your ears, the pacing is all over the place, the absurd leaps in logic the story jumps through are beyond mind-boggling, and it's filled with so many horrible and tired cliches. It has absolutely none of the qualities of the first Ice Age movie, draining this franchise of any ounce of life it had left. The original Ice Age isn't one of the greatest animated movies ever made or anything like that, but it had an actual story with engaging characters and themes. This movie is just a placeholder for something to occupy your kids for an hour and a half. No substance, just grating noise and overbearing nonsense throughout. I truly feel bad for you if you were forced to watch this in a theater by a family member. It's a cancerous waste of your time in every way imaginable.
This is how we're represented. Unbelievable.
Okay, this may be something of a hot take on my end, but I have a soft spot for Hotel Transylvania 2 and 3. Yes, you can argue they're messy movies and paling compared to the first one, but it does have some stuff that's actually of quality. They keep up with the character building of Drac in that each movie explores his relationship with his family, with the first one being about learning to let his daughter live her own life, the second one about him trying to relate to his half-human grandson, and the third one about moving on from the passing of his wife to find love again in the form of a human companion. It's a decent, if far from perfect trilogy of movies that stand out as some of the more underappreciated works of Genndy Tartakovsky. But Sony Animation just couldn't help themselves and demand that they ruin it with an unneeded fourth movie that does nothing to forward Drac's character, and if anything ruins all the development he achieved. Transformania is awful. It has no substantial reason to exist because there's practically nothing about the story that needs to be furthered. Putting aside how it breaks continuity with things like Dennis being hypnotized when it was clearly established in other movies that vampires can't be hypnotized, the plot is completely nonsensical in every avenue. Johnny doesn't feel like he's part of the family because he's not a monster? Where did this even come from? He was a very active and inclusive member of Drac's family, so this just comes completely out of nowhere. Being human never stopped him from connecting with Drac in the previous movies, so why does he suddenly not feel like he's part of the family? Not to mention how easily this problem can be solved. Can't he just ask Mavis to bite him and turn him into a vampire? At least so she doesn't have to go through the grief of seeing her husband grow old and die? But it gets even worse when Drac goes through an existential crisis of passing down the hotel to Mavis because he doesn't want Johnny to be part of the business. And this is exactly what results in the whole conflict regarding the monster-human swap plot, and it's bullshit. Why would Drac just blindly assume that Johnny being involved in running the hotel means it's going to be turned into a 70s theme hotel? Mavis would be running the hotel with him, so he wouldn't be able to just do whatever he wants. So he just makes up a lie about how he can't pass down the hotel to a human. Except he wouldn't be passing it down to a human, he'd be passing it down to his daughter. A lie that certainly won't come back to bite him in the ass later in a scene that character assassinates him by confirming that his relationship with Johnny was something he just never valued. Just why? Why did you do this? Why did you ruin Drac and Johnny's relationship? They were a really fun duo with a lot of chemistry in the previous movies, and here the drama between them is completely forced for the sake of artificial tension. But even putting aside how a character assassinates Drac and ruins his relationship with Johnny, there's so many more nauseating problems with the movie. The story is filled with so many unoriginal tropes that only dour the comedy they're going for. All of those predictable road trip jokes and cliches are here, and they drag the pacing down to a really boring slog. The gimmick of seeing the monsters turn into humans gets old really fast, and they don't even do anything unique or interesting with this concept. It's the most painfully obvious stuff they could have done with these characters. Drac is a fish out of water who's constantly being subjected to slapstick comedy for not knowing how to adapt to his human form. The Invisible Man is naked. Murray is turned into a wrinkly Egyptian guy. Frank is now a handsome heartthrob. Every single one of these ideas is just one singular joke played on repeat for their entire screen time. It's so creatively bankrupt and effortless, which are not things that should be associated with Genndy Tartakovsky. The opportunities to develop the characters and their relationships are wasted because of how rushed the main story is in favor of ineffective jokes. The presence of this monster-human invention is completely world-breaking because why didn't Val Helsing just use that to get rid of the monsters? And it completely breaks its own tension at the end of the movie, because the time limit thing was just some bullshit they made up for plot convenience. The hamster was shot first and was a monster longer, thus would sooner succumb to the effects of the device. but he's instantly turned back to his original form for the sake of a shitty visual gag. It makes the movie completely inconsequential and pointless because there was no urgency in the quest. And overall, it's just so boring and pointless. The story doesn't do anything to develop the characters in any meaningful way. It's just an excuse to milk more money out of the series. Any form of logic is thrown out the window for this cliche, annoying, terrible sequel that muddies what made the first 3 movies fun to watch. Drac and Johnny were fun characters, and this film just makes them into unlikable idiots. And the movie is filled with huge plot holes that just make it fall apart at the seams. Sony Animation had to have held Gendy at gunpoint to make this, because there's no way he would willingly sign off on a shitty sequel like this. Can't you just let the man make original content? Oh shit.
We got a car key, piano key, skeleton key, keyboard, key to the city.
How the fuck did this happen? It's bad enough that Norm of the North exists in the first place, but the fact that it somehow made enough money to not only warrant a sequel, but a whole franchise of films? Truly, we have failed as a species. And you might be wondering why this one is on the list and not Norm of the North 3 and 4. Well, that's because, believe it or not, this is actually as insane and god-awful as it gets. Because this movie isn't just one horrible story that continues a tale that absolutely no one wanted to see continued. It's 2 stories. 2 completely separate movies. 2 completely separate plots that have absolutely nothing to do with each other. They literally took 2 movies that were meant to be separate, forced them together with worn-out duct tape, and tried to sell it as a feature film hoping they'd be able to give it a theatrical release. God have mercy on the damn soul who came up with this hellspawn of a bright idea. I don't even have to speak a word of how atrocious the animation is. Anyone with functioning eyeballs can tell you how it's so horrible it makes a dog turd look like a Picasso replica. But it's not enough for this movie to have revolting animation. It also has the most insufferable collection of characters you can imagine, the stupidest plot lines completely absent of any sort of logic, and all sorts of god-awful pop culture and real-world references that make you want to gouge your eyes out with a spoon. It literally opens with a reference to Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore. Like, what am I even supposed to say to that? The dialogue is filled with so much brain-rotted exposition with some of the most insulting to your intelligence over-explaining of everything you can possibly imagine. They have absolutely zero faith in your intelligence to the point they have to blurt out the most painfully obvious stuff as if this was made for 1-year-olds. I'm not kidding. Every conversation in this movie is ham-fisted and empty with no sense of character to anything being said. It's also completely absurd in concepts like having phone service in the middle of the Arctic when they don't show any power lines anywhere while they're in the Arctic. There isn't even any consistency with how this film works in conjunction with the first one, if you can be crazy enough to even call it that. It literally opens with saying Norm hasn't been crowned king yet when he absolutely was at the end of the first movie. They couldn't even be bothered to pay attention to their own story. How do you even miss something that easy to spot? But oh, don't worry guys, because the actual plot is just as bad. Norm is being framed for robbing banks and absolutely no one is questioning how absurd this is. Why would a polar bear want to rob banks? It's so painfully obvious what's going on here and no one is able to sense the obvious setup. And not to mention how convoluted it is that the obvious villain does the most painfully obvious shit in the world to get themselves caught. Why would he keep the bear suit and key to the city in an easily accessible part of his office instead of, I don't know, his house? And why would he spray bags of money with his cologne? Or why wouldn't he wash the smell off of it? And really, what kind of key to the city is used to break into bank vaults? How does that even work? Do the bank vaults just have a keyhole you can turn? Then what's the point of other modes of security? Why bother with a combination or a code when you can just pick the lock? And you'd think it would end there. But oh no, we still got 40 minutes of runtime to fill, so throw in a completely unrelated plot about ice hockey. You'd think that this movie would be about the keys to the kingdom considering it's literally the name of the movie. But no, the key completely disappears and it's never mentioned again. Now we have to do this painfully cliché sports movie plot with every horrible and overdone trope in the genre. And apparently it gets more ridiculous with the out-of-nowhere plot twist that the villains are using robots. Really? Robots? Sure, why not? So they replace the robots with actual people, but it still makes no sense for them to lose. They're still seasoned players against a team that has never played a single game in their lives. But then we go through all those stupid sports cliches about teamwork and believing in yourself, and that somehow results in the Arctic animals with absolutely zero ice hockey experience winning the game. Good lord, this movie is just driving me up a wall with how batshit its logic is. Norm of the North Keys to the Kingdom is an absolute travesty in every possible avenue the word can be used. An absolute garbage heap of a direct-to-video sequel. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say direct-to-home video? Because this shit actually got a theatrical release. Even if you were just expecting this movie to be absurdly bad because it's a sequel to, well, Norm of the North, it's still painful because of how boring and jaded everything is. The story and conflicts are so generic and predictable. The comedy is a black void of nothingness. The characters are zombies walking around in a sad attempt to resemble fleshed out people with actual humanity. The pacing is filled to the brim with fake padding and artificial filler, so it's not even a 90-minute movie. It's like a 50-minute movie with 40 minutes of obnoxious nonsense. I may get some flack for this, but you know what? At least the first movie attempted to establish character and plot. This one just rushes through every single thing. And because it's trying to be two separate plots with no relevance to each other, it wraps up everything without bothering to develop anything. And the fact that it's still got something of a theatrical run, and 2 follow-up movies after that is insane. If we ever get a Norm of the North 5, then that's God's cue to press the reset button.
Am I really gonna defile this grave for money? Of course I am!
You know what? There may be a part of me that thinks we all owe Sponge on the Run an apology. Oh, not because it was actually a good movie and we were wrong to shit on it, but because we were wrong to think that this was as bad as it gets. Enter Saving Bikini Bottom, the Sandy Cheeks movie. There are people who still debate whether or not the series should end after it went past its prime in season 4. And I feel like that's being generous since the first movie would have served as an apex conclusion before Nick moved on to other properties. But now with this movie, SpongeBob absolutely needs to end because you don't get lower in defiling a beloved classic than this film. This movie has so many problems that plagued Sponge on the Run. The infantile comedy, the no-nonsense plot, the characters being annoying idiots, and terrible pacing that constantly breaks the flow of the story. But somehow they managed to inject those things with steroids and make them like 10 times worse for this movie. The brain-dead attempts at comedy are at an all-time high. The jokes are extremely frantic, relying on juvenile quips and the characters being obnoxious idiots throughout the majority of their screen time. It's the equivalent of jingling keys in front of a baby. It's just a bunch of random noise with no substance behind the humor. It's overly bouncy with no momentum to how anything moves, so even the visual gags feel like something suited for 3-year-olds. Because that's what this movie was aimed at. Not passionate SpongeBob fans, but toddlers with an infantile sense of humor. And that's not even including the disgusting fetish fuel scattered throughout the film. It's not just that the movie has this kind of stuff on screen, but it just holds on to this grotesque content for extended periods of time. Sandy's inflation, the bare feet of kids, the atrocious scene where SpongeBob inhales the fumes of a piece of excrement and receives pleasure from it? Seriously, who produced this, Stan Schneider? And this is supposed to be a movie meant to be viewed by young children? That is really gross and fucked up. And even for the budget they were given to work with, the animation is just ugly. It looks really cheap with no natural flow to anything going on. The bulginess of the CGI doesn't fit the traditional style of the characters, nor does it properly lean into the style of humor the series is known for. It looks more like an awkward knockoff of theatrical release movies with actually good use of their 3D art style. There's no authentic synergy or ingenuity to the movie's use of 3D. It has too many oversaturated colors and badly inflated character models. Even Sponge on the Run had more appealing character models in comparison. But even if you want to ignore these things and just try to watch it as a movie with a 3-act structure, the story and characters are terrible. The pacing is painfully fast because of how much of the runtime is spent on horrible jokes and visual gags, never leaving time to develop more important aspects of the plot. It's completely disjointed and messy with an unappealing premise to boot. So SpongeBob and Sandy have to venture to the surface world because some scientists want to turn the inhabitants of Bikini Bottom into carnival attractions and toys. You'd think it would be interesting, but it's so over-exaggerated without grounding it in a down-to-earth way. Not to mention how the villain is completely incompetent and stupid. She's a complete non-threat as a villain because she's constantly fumbling around and not doing anything nefarious. Her scenes are bloated with hideous special effects and god-awful acting, giving her no positive impressions or any sort of menace in her presence. And oh dear God, what did they do to SpongeBob? They removed all the complexity his character's supposed to have and turned him into an insufferable comic relief who refuses to shut the hell up. He's extremely childish with an unbearable lack of self-awareness. SpongeBob is supposed to be a kid at heart but with limits and an adult understanding of his surroundings, not a 5-year-old on a sugar high. Every second he's on screen just wastes time with terrible jokes and cringe dialogue. He shouldn't even be a main character because he adds nothing of substance to the adventure. Just make it about Sandy on a mission to save the town. In some way, the movie at least tries to expand on her character, exploring her relationship with her family and how they had expectations of her outside of science. But the movie never takes time to develop Sandy, and her relationship with her family is never explored. Her relatives are background noise with annoying gimmicks in replacement of actual personalities, having no interesting chemistry with Sandy herself. And because of how much of the movie's runtime is wasted on horrible comedy and abysmal song numbers, Sandy's character is never given any breathing room to develop. The first SpongeBob movie and even some of the second one had actual substance to them. Real character moments with them struggling and developing and overcoming their flaws to improve as people. Things that have been sadly lost in the modern movies, with Sponge on the Run being a glorified direct-to-home movie masquerading as a real film. But give Sponge on the Run some credit, at least it wasn't this. The Sandy Cheeks movie is undeniable evidence of how badly this franchise needs to end, because Nickelodeon and Paramount are completely out of control with how they shove it down our throats. This movie is nothing but loud, obnoxious noise for 1 hour and 15 minutes, and the SpongeBob series deserves better than that.
Just say yes.
No!
Wrong answer.
Hey, I didn't say every entry on this list would be a modern or recent sequel. We gotta make room for the horrors of old, too. Even after all these years, I'm still dumbfounded that any group of people thought this was a good idea. Taking Don Bluth's timeless masterpiece The Secret of NIMH and giving it a shitty sequel. It completely removes the dark and ominous tone the original is known for, lacking any real tension and danger. Instead, they opted to turn it into a childish Disney afternoon special, complete with low-budget animation, horrible songs, choppy story structure, and characters that aren't even a 50th as interesting or well-written. First off, the songs. Who thought this was a good idea? Who looked at The Secret of NIMH and said, oh yeah, let's turn this into a musical? And even then, they're completely terrible. Every single singer is painfully off-key. There is absolutely no direction to their cadence at all. The instrumentals are incredibly low budget. None of them have any sort of impact or energy. It's very dry and lacking in variety, as if it was rushed out for a school play. The least they could have done was do something to make them memorable. And maybe they are, but not the way the filmmakers intended. They make up some of the worst parts of the entire film, especially during the third act, which we'll get to in a minute. There's also the terrible, very badly paced story that follows one of the worst framing devices in storytelling. The stupid prophecy chosen one nonsense. It removes the agency from the characters because there's no natural choices made by anyone in the cast. Everything that happens in the story is completely artificial because the events are all dictated by some predetermined magic bullshit. Yes, there was magic stuff in the original, but it was done to show the supernatural elements of the world and how the rodents evolved through the experiments of NIMH. It was a natural element to the movie that wasn't contrived or removed agency from the characters. This prophecy nonsense is only here because it's the only idea they had for a plot. No creativity, no thought process. They just go, the prophecy said so, and that's the explanation for everything in this movie. Even without the whole prophecy thing, the movie is too bright and upbeat. It's a complete 180 in terms of mood because it's absolutely nothing like the original's eeriness that made it stand out. The oversaturation of the visuals takes away from the atmosphere, and it only makes for a boring, generic tone, and the lighthearted approach to the conflict just makes it too childish. There's no sense of urgency and danger because the world is now overly cheerful and less scary, and it's all weighed down by how painfully forgettable Timmy is as a protagonist. He has no personality whatsoever and has no fulfilling character arc except living up to the expectations of the prophecy. He has no interesting chemistry with any of the other characters, including his brother, which is supposed to be a big point considering how he becomes the villain of the movie. All Martin does during his screen time before the villain reveal is ridicule Timmy and act jealous of him for being the chosen one. So where's that brotherly bond they're supposed to have? And it only gets worse during the third act because that's when the movie goes completely off the goddamn rails. This is supposed to be where all the stakes and suspension is, and the movie just turns into a wacky Saturday morning cartoon with a terrible upbeat villain song, and a villain that's way too over-exaggerated. He's too silly and cartoony to be sinister, and the visuals are embarrassing. They're all dopey and foolish to the point the movie is completely unrecognizable as a sequel to The Secret of NIMH. It feels like an episode of Tiny Toons instead of an authentic continuation of one of Don Bluth's sacred works. And because they wasted so much time on annoying songs and incoherent character moments, the ending ends up being very badly rushed. They do the whole they're still good in him thing, go on a ridiculous chase through the lab, and it all leads up to a giant fiery explosion that even Michael Bay would think is going overboard. And then they celebrate that stupid self-fulfilled prophecy that probably never would have happened if Nicodemus didn't just pull it out of his ass. Martin wouldn't have become a villain out of bitter jealousy, Timmy wouldn't have grown to be an egotistical idiot, and they probably would have done the whole rescue Jenny's parents thing without putting everyone in danger. You can make an argument for other sequels on this list being more obnoxious and annoying, but this one is so horrible because of how much of a middle finger it is to the original. The Secret of NIMH is a monolith of filmmaking, going above and beyond what people thought could be done with animation as an art form. It was dark and atmospheric without going overboard. It treated kids with respect and dignity with mature subject matter without being condescending. The characters were so fantastic and fleshed out, and the pacing of the story was airtight. to this day it's still considered by most as the pinnacle of Don Bluth's career, and it deserves that mantle for how breathtaking and phenomenal it is. This piece of shit makes a mockery of all of that. Even putting aside the obvious stuff like the childish tone and underdeveloped characters, the narrative is just a complete mess. It doesn't properly resolve a lot of plot points because of how overstuffed it feels. It throws in a lot of ground they don't cover because of how rushed it is. Scenes will usually transition out of the blue, and there's a lot of annoying exposition that just randomly drops plot information, resulting in rushed, incoherent dialogue. And it's all filled with annoying cliches that make the movie predictable and groggy. The original Secret of NIMH was not like this. It was a really deep and meaningful masterclass of animation. The Secret of NIMH 2 Timmy to the Rescue is just an embarrassment. Just a cheap and desperate ploy to make money off its legacy. You want a real Secret of NIMH sequel? Read the book.
Oh, hello there! Shrek here, and I'm ticked off.
Don't act surprised, you knew this one was coming. The animated sequel so universally despised that everyone rightfully pretends it doesn't exist in favor of the much more satisfying conclusion Shrek Forever After. I know people will think it redundant of me to talk about this one because of how done to death the subject is, but I think it stands as a testament to its infamous reputation that even after all these years and with the host of new shitty sequels we've recently had, that this one still stands among the absolute worst of them all. Shrek the Third is insultingly terrible with how great the first two movies are, especially in terms of its comedy. The timing of every single joke is completely off, and the direction behind the humor is aimless and uncreative. It feels like they may have been going somewhere with some of them, but the way they're executed is extremely overcrowded. They try to have this rapid-fire edge to it where they're constantly hitting you with funny bits and quips to keep the energy going, but so much of it is really ham-fisted and forced. They go by too quickly before letting their punchline set in, which prevents any of the comedy from having a lasting impact. The first two movies had a proper method for breaking up jokes in between story beats, allowing them to properly intertwine with each other. That way you can enjoy the story while still being provided with effective humor. Shrek the Third doesn't have that edge. It's just the writers constantly throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. And what sticks is so dull and fruitless. From painfully obvious pop culture references to things that drag out for way too long, like the whole donkey and puss switching bodies thing. Though I'm personally capable of forgiving the mediocre comedy as long as it has good story and characters. After all, that is what the first two Shrek movies were about, right? A cast of amazing characters and interesting storylines, and the comedy is a tool for helping us explore those things. Well, sadly the story and characters are completely dreadful. There's a very horrible mood swing problem throughout in which they're trying to be dramatic and serious while being silly and comedic at the same time. You know, the MCU school of comedy. The problem is that they have no sense of direction and balance for how these two moods play out. The worst of it is the extremely tasteless deathbed scene and funeral for Fiona's father. They're clearly trying to make us feel for the characters as they go through the stages of grief from losing a loved one, but these scenes are constantly being broken up by horrible ill-timed jokes. It kills the tension and emotional weight we're supposed to be feeling, and it's not funny because of how intrusive and inappropriate the jokes are. It's a very serious moment and it plays off as a joke, to the point that it becomes a mockery of people who actually go through this kind of thing that's very, very painful to deal with. And even without the mood swing problem, the story is just a bunch of nonsense. The plot is basically just a boring fetch quest where Shrek has to go and get this guy so he can be king. And there's never a moment where it presents personal stakes to Shrek and his relationship with Fiona. The other movies explored the motions of Shrek's relationship with Fiona, and the obstacles he'd overcome to prove his loyalty to her. It was always really heartwarming to see the lengths Shrek would go to prove his love for her and why they deserve to be together. But this movie ends up sidelining that in an attempt to put the spotlight on Arthur, who's a painfully boring and forgettable sidekick. I mean, they try to focus on Shrek's insecurities about being a parent and questioning if he's ready to handle that responsibility, but it's given so little attention and often played off as a joke. At first it seemed like they were gonna do something with it with Shrek and Fiona talking about having kids, but then they end up going separate ways and don't meet again for the rest of the movie, and all of a sudden Shrek is like, I'm ready to be a father. He never goes through any actual struggles concerning his impending parenthood, and his relationship with Arthur isn't used to forward that aspect of his character, so it just amounts to Shrek doing nothing throughout his screen time, and the rest of the characters don't fare much better. All the returning characters are just background noise who do nothing, and the new characters they introduce are really grating and annoying. And one major factor in this is how overcrowded the cast feels. Shrek the Third has way too many characters and storylines going on, and because of how overstuffed the cast is, it doesn't make time to develop them or give them interesting personalities. They're just used as a springboard for the movie's terrible comedy, and that's saying nothing about how pathetic of a villain Prince Charming is. Instead of coming up with an interesting new threat, they just opted to rehash a villain from the previous movie, which might have worked if they did something to make him a compelling threat, or at least an interesting character. Instead, the movie goes out of its way to constantly hammer in how much of a pathetic mama's boy he is, and not to mention his master plan makes absolutely no sense. sense. Why did you go through the trouble of setting up this stupid play if your end goal is to kill Shrek? You have him right where you want him. He has no means of escape. Just execute him instead of doing this dumb play. His presence in the movie has no payoff because he doesn't go through any new growths or development. He's just here for revenge against Shrek. It all leads into a really stupid climax where all the villains decide to stop being villains because Arthur gave a stupid last-minute speech, even when it makes no sense for half these villains to want to be good guys. It's just the stereotypical be true to yourself speech and it has no meaningful ring to it. But the thing that really makes Shrek the Third so worthless is how 100% pointless it is. It adds nothing meaningful to the overall story, none of the characters grow or develop, there's no new worthwhile discovery, it's an eventless endeavor that no one even acknowledges in Shrek Forever After, unless you count that one bit where they reference the king's death. Seriously, you could easily skip over to the fourth movie and not miss anything important. Shrek and Fiona end up not ruling over the kingdom anyway, so there's no personal agency for either of them in this movie. I know that there are some things in the movie that have gotten a bit of a cult following over the years. There's some good things like the stuff with the princesses, and you may get an occasional good joke like Shrek mocking Charming's horrible theatrics. But it's just not worth the overall awfulness this movie has to it. Like I said in the previous part, you can make an argument for other sequels on this list being more obnoxious and annoying, but what makes Shrek the Third so horrible is how bad of a sequel it is to its established franchise. It adds absolutely nothing of value to the story of Shrek, and Shrek is an amazing franchise that deserves better for how well the other three movies aged with time. But this is just a middle finger to everything Shrek stands for, and for that, its legacy as one of the worst animated sequels of all time is well deserved, even in the year of 2025.
Ring the bell!
It's the moment you've been waiting for, the obligatory Disney sequel entry. Yep, back in the day Disney was pretty infamous for making direct-to-home release sequels of their animated classics. But thankfully they don't do that anymore. Oh no, now they give them theatrical releases. I guess history really is doomed to repeat itself. Yeah, there were some surprisingly good ones, but most of them range from boring to absolutely awful. At best, they're just kind of boring and forgettable. At worst, they're a complete middle finger to everything the original accomplished. And it's not so much that these movies were terrible, but because Disney made so many of these goddamn things. The Little Mermaid 2, The Jungle Book 2, Aladdin 2, The Fox and the Hound 2, Brother Bear 2, Beauty and the Beast 2, Tarzan 2, Pocahontas 2, Cinderella 2, need I say more? I'm sure some of you are expecting me to go with something like Frozen 2 or Toy Story 4, but I don't know if I'd go that far because they at least had some form of effort put into them. But these direct-to-home video and DVD sequels from the 90s and 2000s, there was zero effort put into them. Just a pathetic ploy to cash in on the popularity of their theatrical releases. Honestly, if I really wanted to, I could have just made half of this list ripping into these trash Disney sequels because they really are that offensive. But I have to make sure this list has variety, so I can only go with one. But which one can I possibly choose to represent the absolute worst of the worst that these direct-to-home sequels have to offer? Well, after a lot of thought, and after much deliberation, I ultimately decided that there could only be one definitive choice.
Imagine someone to love who loves you.
Yeah, remember that VHS promo where the voice actress would go on and on about how amazing this movie is? How it was gonna be a really sweet story that you're gonna wanna have in your house and watch it over and over again? Well, that was a fucking lie. The Hunchback of Notre Dame 2 is an abortion. A straight up gross and unbearable piece of goat excrement masquerading as a faithful continuation of a beloved classic. Everything that was good about the original is completely gone. The music, characters, story, tone, animation, voice acting, themes, villain, every single thing you can imagine goes through the most drastic downgrade and then some. It's actually amazing how they managed to take everything that made The Hunchback of Notre Dame a beloved classic and butcher all of it with a runtime that's just barely under an hour long. The animation, for starters, is fucking ugly. You can't even make the argument that this was made on a smaller budget because this came out after The Lion King 2, Aladdin 3, A Goofy Movie 2. Hell, even Lady and the Tramp 2 had more appealing artistry than this mountain of vomit. The look of everything from the backgrounds to the way the characters move is so horribly stiff and dated. It's completely distracting and robs everything of its visual appeal. The colors are all worn out and dim to the point it feels like it was deliberately desaturated before release as part of some sick joke. There's no sense of identity to the hues or shading of anything on screen, and not to mention how completely awful the cinematography is. The original was made with a massive scale in mind, complete with all these wide shots and big scope visuals that capture the size of its setting. It made things like the city, the underground, the bell tower, the church, everything look gargantuan in size and made you feel like you were sucked right into the atmosphere of the movie. It was breathtaking in ways that I don't think I can describe with words. And this sequel takes a giant shit on that. The cinematography is extremely unimpressive. The way everything is shot and visualized is so feeble and poor. There's nothing striking or raw about this setting. It's just some boring looking town. And if you thought that was bad, then you are not ready for how gross and atrocious the songs are. I wasn't expecting anything on par with the original soundtrack, but good God, they didn't even try here. The lyrics are so repetitive and forced. Every song in this movie is a horrible love song, and it's the most unimaginative collection of words you can imagine for this kind of mush. The instrumentals are so foamed in and lazy with no engaging orchestration. And the vocals? Oh dear God, the vocals are absolutely dreadful. How do you take the amazing singing from the original and downgrade it to singing so bad it makes you want to stab your eardrums with a pencil? And finally, the characters and plot are completely brain dead. I shouldn't even have to tell you why a guy's plot to steal a bell built with jewels inside makes absolutely zero sense. A bell is supposed to emit sound by knocking it around with a clapper. Putting jewels inside is going to result in the sound of shattering glass and possibly rendering the bell useless for its intended purpose. I mean, you could make the argument that he wants to pull out the gems from the inside and then sell them, but it still makes zero sense that this thing even exists. The jewels are built on the inside of the fucking bell. Why would they put any amount of time into making something that no one is gonna see? Is it because of how it represents a stupid metaphor about how beauty is on the inside? Oh yeah, we totally needed this bell to send that message to kids. It's not like you already made an entire fucking movie based around that message already. But putting aside the convoluted conflict, the characters are unbearable. The gargoyles are still annoying, which shouldn't come as a surprise, but Phoebus is a dumbass who just brags about loving his wife and being prejudiced against the circus performers, which completely contradicts his morals and beliefs from the first movie. Esmeralda is just here for the sake of reminding us that yes, she was in the original, and their son is completely obnoxious and serves zero purpose except being kidnapped and used as leverage by the villain. Quasimodo goes back on his character development of wanting to be accepted by the townspeople, and now his new motivation is wanting someone to love him. Wasn't one of the main messages of the original that you don't need love or a romantic partner to find happiness? Because love wasn't an end goal of Quasi's character arc? Well, now they have to retcon that because of people who felt bad that Esmeralda chose Phoebus over him. Which might not have been so bad if his love interest wasn't the most tone-deaf and forgettable love interest in the history of Disney love interests. Hell, even Pocahontas and John Smith had more chemistry than these two. When I have to say that out loud, you know something somewhere went horribly wrong. And I get that a lot of people like the villain in a so bad he's good way for how over the top he is, but coming off of the unmatched theatrics of Frollo, he just feels like an insult. There's nothing menacing about him. He's just a guy who wants to steal some jewels. I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with me on this one, as everyone has their own idea of which Disney sequel is the worst one, but from what I looked up, they at least had something over The Hunchback of Notre Dame 2. Beauty and the Beast 3 and Mulan 2 had some pretty funny meme faces in it. Cinderella 2 gave Anastasia a rather well-written redemption arc. A lot of the other bad ones at least had some good visuals. Even Fox and the Hound 2 had some really good animation. And some good furry bait, I guess. But The Hunchback of Notre Dame 2 has nothing appealing in it. The songs are god-awful, the animation is revolting, the villain is a dollar store version of Rouge the Bat. It goes against the messaging of the original by making it a love story for Quasimodo, and its tone is absolutely nothing like the original. The original Hunchback of Notre Dame is a masterpiece. One of the most visually striking and fantastically written stories in Disney's animated canon. The Hunchback of Notre Dame 2 is a pure cash grab. It exists for absolutely no reason except money. There is just nothing redeemable about this putrid pile of dog shit.
Shoot them with a dehydration gun!
I didn't think it was possible, but somehow they did it. DreamWorks managed to make a sequel even worse than Shrek the Third. And it's not just for surface level reasons either. People are really quick to point out the obvious stuff like the terrible animation, terrible voice acting, and the dozens of ways Megamind could have easily ended the conflict if he just used the dehydration gun on the villains. Now yes, all of these things are indeed horrible, but honestly, they don't even crack the top 10 of what's wrong with this movie. Yes, the animation is bad, and I normally give that a pass on how it was made on a smaller budget, but then you remember the Puss in Boots series was made on a smaller budget too, and they managed to have some good visuals, so what's this movie's excuse? And yes, the voice acting is terrible, but I don't hold that against the voice actors themselves. It was virtually impossible to fill those shoes because of how the original voice cast was so iconic and impossible to replace. And many of these voice actors have done some very good work in the past. It could just be the direction they were given or how jarring their voices are with the character designs, but it's really easy to see why they don't work. But again, they're still talented voice actors, and I commend them for at least trying to put in the effort for the script they were given to work with. And yes, it is absolutely terrible that Megamind never thinks to use the the dehydration gun in the dozens of ways it could have been used to end the conflict. But this problem can be attributed to how the dehydration gun was established to be a thing in the original movie. Let me put it this way. Even without the existence of the dehydration gun, there is no escaping the mountain of other things wrong with this disgusting piece of shit movie. No, my problems with the movie come from the butchering of all the characters' personalities, the convoluted world building, the absolute disregard for any sort of continuity from the first film, the choppy pacing, the pathetic villains, the god-awful modernization of the comedy, and honestly just the idea that anyone even thought this was a good idea. Making a sequel to an animated movie 14 years later when there was absolutely nothing about it that was warranting a continuation. I could actually picture someone at DreamWorks going, "Hey guys, look, that thing we made years ago is suddenly exploding in popularity. Let's make a sequel and milk the fans for more money." Right, because that worked so well for Warner Brothers. There's no consistency to how any of the characters behave in this movie. All of them are constantly doing stupid things for stupid reasons to advance the plot. Megamind himself is thoroughly assassinated. He went from a down-to-earth and relatable underdog to a bleakly mean-spirited asshole to all his friends. He's constantly acting egotistical towards them as if they didn't help him develop into a better person at all. Not only that, they also made him an incompetent retard who's so stupid that he doesn't even know how to operate a toaster. His intelligence is in the negative numbers in this movie, and so much of his screen time revolves around him being an incompetent fool. Roxanne and Minion are also turned into hopeless doormats who just put up with his stupidity and mistreatment of them for no reason. And the new sidekick they introduce is a fucking moron, who actively puts themselves in danger for media attention. She deliberately stands underneath falling rubble she could have easily dodged, just so Megamind can rescue her and she can brag about it on her platform. And we have to deal with this piece of shit throughout the entire picture. She serves no purpose except to be a burden to the people around her while making stupid references to social media. And let's just stop right there for a second, because how the hell is social media a thing in this movie? The original Megamind was made in 2010, and the movie itself was very reflective of that time period. But in this movie, there's all sorts of references to modern internet culture. Influencers, streamers, followers, smartphones, the works. I mean, I guess it makes sense as this was made 14 years after the first movie, except for one tiny little detail. There's literally a line of dialogue in the movie that states it's only been 2 days since the events of the first movie. Wait a fuck. You're telling me that it's only been 2 days? 2 days since the events of the original movie, and you already have all this modern internet culture and YouTube stuff? How the fuck is this possible? How did your technology and internet culture evolve so drastically in only 2 days? This goes beyond the bullshit they pull in modern Simpsons, where the characters are ageless zombies yet their technology is constantly changing to match ours, thus no longer fitting the 90s timeframe it was invented to be a response to. This is cringe desperation to relate to the obvious Gen Z man-children this was being marketed to. And that leads into how absolutely horrific the comedy is. It is the most painful, effortless, obvious, dated modern attempts at jokes you can imagine. They are constantly making horrible pop culture references and references to internet culture. The very first joke of the movie is literally a reference to people who don't touch grass. And later Megamind straight up says, "Oh, it was just a prank, bro." They actually put that in this piece of shit movie. There is absolutely no sense of creativity or wit or effort in this movie's comedy whatsoever. It's just them going, "How do you do, fellow kids?" for 90 fucking minutes. And due to the horrible meta humor, the pacing is absolutely terrible. It's constantly jumping between being slow as a snail and rushed beyond belief. There's never a moment in this entire thing where they engage in proper plot development. It's just jumping from story beat to story beat while holding on to shitty jokes. And oh my god, the villains are just awful. Awful, awful, awful. They all have obnoxious personalities and gimmicks with zero functioning brain cells. They seriously can't put 2 and 2 together to figure out Megamind is a good guy until like halfway through, because they're just that stupid. And not to mention how menacing and threatening the movie tries to make them look when there's absolutely no menace to them at all. Megamind has invented galactic technology that can easily overpower and defeat them in multiple ways. This movie should be over in like 2 seconds, but he never brings out any of his reality-shattering technology to defeat them. The only reason they pose any threat whatsoever is because Megamind is an incompetent retard in this movie. For God's sake, they are literally defeated by tennis balls. Fucking tennis balls. Even though they have powers that can easily counter this. They were literally defeated by a dog toy launcher. You absolute weaklings. They couldn't even be bothered to be consistent with the first movie, as there's a huge load of continuity errors and plot holes. If I went over every single one of them, we'd be here until next month. So I'll just go over the 2 worst ones. fans. The fact that this Doom Syndicate exists at all is a huge plot hole because they never shut up about how they used to be old friends with Megamind. If that's the case, where the fuck have you been? If these guys were really such a big part of Megamind's life, you'd think he would have mentioned them more in the first movie. Why didn't you break out of jail and team up with him after he took over the city? Or did you just not exist until 2 days ago when DreamWorks pulled this plot out of their ass? And then you have that bullshit excuse for a stinger at the end when they introduce Machiavellian, who apparently taught Megamind everything he knows about evil, even though according to the first movie he learned it as a baby while he was being raised in jail. Again, why did Megamind never mention you before if you were his mentor? Unless you're actively lying and this whole movie was just some elaborate ad for a Peacock series. God, I hate this movie so much. It is only a year and a half old at the time of this recording, and I think it's a testament to how grotesque and volatile it is if it managed to rank this high on the list. Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate is a cancerous rape of your senses in every possible way. A giant middle finger to not just Megamind fans, but to anyone with functioning brain cells. Just take it from me and avoid this shit like DreamWorks avoids mentioning Shark Tale.
Advantage number 204 of being a penguin. We have John Cena!
Like, where the fuck do I even start with this one? I've seen the WWE do some pretty pathetic stuff in the past when it comes to their shitty promotional movies, but this is without question the bottom of the barrel in terms of jerking themselves off in the name of pandering to kids and making money off of something popular. Surf's Up 2 Wave Mania is soulless in every conceivable notion of the word. It completely abandons the themes of the original, exploring legacy and pursuing your passion and setting a goal for yourself to live life to its fullest, all thrown away in favor of the most insane corporate dick sucking you will ever see in your life. Even when compared to all the other low-budget stuff we've seen so far on this list, the visuals are so atrocious and putrid. There is no sense of life or detail to anything on screen. The character models are completely flat, and the backgrounds are just ugly oversaturated settings with no sense of authenticity to them. Its barren, outdated style of animation is so static and stilted, which also results in terrible cinematography. The original made use of its camera work to replicate the feel of a visual documentary. In that regard, it's actually a very unique animated movie. It was a creative choice that made the movie feel more in tune with its parodying of sports movies but maintaining a consistent feel. Wave Mania has none of that. It's just a bunch of boring shots and cuts that you would see in any low-budget movie. The perspectives are completely warped and there's none of that creative scope the first movie had. They also go so far as to completely butcher Cody's character. They retconned his growth and development by making him go back to obsessing over winning when at the end of the last movie he learned that winning isn't everything. He's constantly acting antagonistic towards Tank for no reason except he wants to be the winner, even going so far as trying to have him killed while they're sailing over molten lava. So much for that valuable life lesson of humility he learned in the original. Now he's just a straight up psycho. The other returning characters are completely wasted. They say nothing of value and do nothing of value. They're just walking around aimlessly while the bullshit plot is going on in the foreground, which is also a load of bird crap. When they're not just rehashing elements from the first movie, it's a stupid road trip plot where the gang is traveling to ride this lightning wave. It's completely directionless and filled with all sorts of nonsensical detours because they had to think of something to fill up the runtime. So much of the movie is just random filler that doesn't tie into anything. Its plot is practically non-existent with no story or character development to be found. There is no sense of growth anywhere. No one changes, no one learns anything. The heroes want something, there's some obstacles, they get what they want, the end. There is absolutely no sense of narrative in this movie. It's just the characters having shitty inconsequential conversations while traveling across these barren wastelands. And then you have the movie's abhorrent comedy. The humor in this movie is completely non-existent. So much of their attempts at jokes are just stroking the egos of the WWE stars and they hold on them for so long. Just like the story and animation, it's completely non-existent and soulless. There's no genuine passion for comedy or making people laugh. It's just more promotional material for the WWE. It is the most miserable compilation of jaded gimmicks, pop culture references, and painfully drawn-out stalling for the runtime you can imagine. But honestly, these are things that can be said for pretty much every other entry on the list. Bad characters, comedy, music, story structure, and animation. At this point, it's nothing new. But what truly makes this movie so offensive and disgusting, what really drives anyone who watches it up a wall of insanity, is the unbelievable lengths of corporate dick sucking. It only exists for Sony to suck off Vince McMahon and his legion of superstars, while completely erasing everything about Surf's Up and replacing it with corporate brain rot. It's just propaganda. The WWE characters aren't even characters. They are literally just the WWE stars inserted into the film. They didn't even bother to come up with any names for these so-called characters. They are literally called The Undertaker and Peg and John Cena, etc. It's just them. It's just the WWE wrestlers and nothing else. They have absolutely no personality throughout their screen time. Their only reason for existing in this movie is to promote their real-life counterparts. And the movie never stops reminding you of how shameless they are in doing this. Every line of dialogue, every action they take is just them promoting these people with absolutely no sense of humanity to them, basking in their awesomeness and shoving it down your throat until you choke on it. And it's not even enough that the movie revolves around blowing their metaphorical dicks. They had to make it so that they're the inspiration behind Cody's character. Yeah, never mind Big Z and the struggles they went through together, they completely retconned his backstory just so they can talk about how awesome John Cena is. Wasn't it so totally worth it, you guys? Surf's Up 2 Wave Mania isn't simply one of the worst animated sequels ever made. It is one of the worst movies in the history of cinema. It doesn't simply butcher or ruin everything that happens in the original movie. It erases it. It erases everything that Surf's Up was supposed to be about and makes it into a shitty advertisement for self-insert visual porn for the WWE to jack off to, with $100 bills as the tissues. This isn't even a movie. It's just a shitty promotion for WWE. A soulless commercial from the moment it starts to the moment it mercifully ends. This movie is practically a crime, a physical assault on everyone who was passionate for the original Surf's Up, from the people who worked on it to the fans who loved it. It is an empty, black void of nothingness masquerading as a feature film, and Vince McMahon deserves nothing short of an early grave for giving life to this grotesque atrocity. So, right about now you're probably thinking to yourself, what could possibly be worse than that?
I hate you!
Before we go any further, I need to preface this by explaining how The Land Before Time is one of my favorite movies of all time. Not just in animation, but in general. I know a lot of people consider The Secret of NIMH to be Don Bluth's magnum opus, and I understand why. But I personally believe The Land Before Time to be his greatest creation. It explores very deep and human themes such as grief, loss, friendship, pride, coming of age, family, prejudice, and the natural cycle of life on a universal level. It never panders or talks down to people with timeless dialogue that can be understood by any audience of any age. They never got desperate and tried to make any sort of 80s references or mention anything relating to pop culture. It just lets the characters act organic in the setting they were placed in. It's a perfectly paced, airtight story without a second of wasted screen time that challenged the boundaries of animation in ways that were never done before, and arguably haven't been done since. Over 35 years later, every single aspect of the visuals have aged perfectly. Not just the artwork, but the way the movie looks and feels. Its use of different perspective and points of view made the world feel humongous, and it was so captivating you actually felt like you were there. The size and scope of everything from the landscapes to the dinosaurs themselves are breathtaking and immersive with a unique use of its 2D art style, and every character is fantastic. From the level-headed Littlefoot who has to struggle with the loss of his mother, to the prideful Sarah who learns to have humility at the end, and everyone in between. They each have bright, vibrant personalities that complement their designs, and the voice acting is so dedicated and fluent. They all have incredibly memorable interactions and development with each other, and the journey they have across this harsh prehistoric world makes it feel more transcendent and timeless. This movie holds no punches in its depiction of nature, and how the age of dinosaurs could have really been like. It's brutal, ruthless, and punishing with danger lurking in every corner. The level of hostility and mercilessness in this world really made you feel for the characters and the dangers they were placed in, but it also had a brighter and hopeful side to it that made the struggles and losses worth it in the end. And the movie's soundtrack is simply beautiful. It covers so many intense emotions that perfectly fit every single scene in the story, elevating the characters and their chemistry with each other further, as well as the danger this world posed. It was a movie that drastically challenged Disney at the time by being their spiritual opposite in what you'd expect from an animated movie aimed at kids. It was lighthearted but also really harsh. It had no musical numbers, focusing purely on the characters and their journey across this world, and its themes were more true to life than anything Disney was doing at the time, and they were handled so perfectly with the utmost respect for both the subject matter and its intended children audience. It was the absolute peak of animation in the 1980s. I would go so far to say it's on par with the works of Hayao Miyazaki released during that decade. To say that it aged well wouldn't even scratch the surface of how heavenly this movie is. It's executed in a way that can only be described as perfect, making it accessible to all generations of moviegoers. Now that I got that out of my system, hopefully you'll understand why I loathe the direct-to-home video sequels.
Leave me alone!
I mean, talk about a series of movies that exist for no reason except to milk a franchise bone dry for all it's worth and exploiting people's nostalgia for it. Not once in my entire life did I ever ask myself, oh boy, I wonder what happened to Littlefoot and his friends after the original movie. Nobody cares! They found the Great Valley. They reunited with their families. That's it. The story is over. But Universal just had to pull a Universal and shit out sequels at a rapid-fire pace. And I mean that very literally. They made so many of these things that even Disney would be blushing in embarrassment. They made 13 sequels to this movie. That's right, 13. Fucking 13. How do you stretch an animated film series out that long? The fucking Swan Princess had less sequels. And believe me when I tell you that these sequels completely fucked everything that made the original a timeless wonder. Remember how I just said the original challenged Disney by being their spiritual opposite, having no musical numbers and down-to-earth animation and characters? Well, Universal randomly woke up one day and said, hey, maybe the mouse was onto something, and just turned these sequels into horrific Disney knockoffs. They Disneyfied The Land Before Time, stripping it of its unique identity in order to pander to the lowest common denominator of that time. These sequels had it all when it came to ruining what made the original so great. The characters are stripped of their unique personalities and turned into incompetent, obnoxious morons. The animation is painfully cheap, making everything look extremely dated and ugly. Everything is way too whimsical and cheery, upsetting the original movie's more grounded tone. The songs are fucking horrid. Every single one of them can only be described as kids bop slop. The lyrics are mind-numbing, the instrumentals are grating, the visuals are embarrassing, and the vocal performances range from bland to oh my god, can John Wick please just shove a pencil in my ear right now? And the plotlines of these movies got so fucking insane as they went on. Asteroids, ancient curses, holiday events, going against the harsh nature of its world by having the Leaf Eaters become friends with the Sharp Teeth. They even went so far as to throw in aliens. Seriously, they put goddamn aliens in The Land Before Time. What is happening? Thank you, Universal. Thank you so much for bastardizing The Land Before Time with these horrible sequels. You took a mature, meaningful, very deep and adult movie about recovering from loss and the natural cycle of life and turned it into a toddler's paradise. And the worst of these garbage sequels, without a doubt in my mind, is The Land Before Time 13, The Wisdom of Friends. The plot is Littlefoot and his friends helping the Yellow Bellies reunite with their herd while searching for their valley. Which, okay, it sounds reminiscent of the simple down-to-earth tone of the original. That one was also about the characters reuniting with their herd while searching for their valley, so it can't be that bad, right? But trust me when I say that summarizing the events of the movie is not the same thing as watching it for yourself, because every second of this movie is just pain and agony to anyone who grew up with the original. The animation is bad, very bad. Yes, you can make the argument that it looks good or not as bad as other entries on the list, but compared to the style of the original, it's just insulting. The lack of polish compared to Don Bluth's artwork is very evident. Characters look off-model and their expressions are way too bright and dopey. There's no sense of restraint in how anything is drawn, resulting in everything looking too stretchy and cartoony, which does not fit the mood the original movie set. It's less of a proper successor to Don Bluth's style and more something Cartoon Network would produce for one of their TV movies. But really, the animation is the least of this movie's problems because it only gets so much worse from there. The Yellow Bellies are completely insufferable characters. I won't even dignify them by saying their names because their characters have no dignity whatsoever. They're made to be intentionally obnoxious, and throughout their screen time they're nothing but a burden to everyone around them. They're constantly almost getting themselves killed, constantly putting others in danger, constantly having no awareness of their surroundings. And they do this so many times that you wonder why Littlefoot and the gang even bother to help them. Just let natural selection take its course. At what point do you finally go, okay assholes, just die? They have no compelling personalities and no purpose in the story other than for Littlefoot to babysit them. And the movie revolves around these assholes. The plot compels us to suffer through their obnoxious antics and it just gets more and more painful. Not to mention how the other characters are just there to take up screen time. They say and do nothing noteworthy and are just along for the ride. Their personalities are non-existent, replaced with just bland stereotypical kid characters. The worst case being with Littlefoot. Oh my god, what did you do to this character? They turned him into the biggest moron of the group. A clueless dolt with no sense of awareness or intelligence. He puts himself in dangerous situations like crossing a ravine to get some food that he can just as easily get from any other tree. In the original, he was the smartest and most responsible character. Here, he's just stupid. His plan to find the Yellow Belly Valley is to just aimlessly wander the wasteland because he thinks he'll eventually find it because, oh well, it's a place I've never been to before. Like, are you serious? How is that supposed to magically help you know where to go? It doesn't make any sense for Littlefoot to be this stupid. He displayed more awareness and intelligence in previous movies. He was younger in the second movie when he was babysitting Chomper and doing similar shit. He had prior experience with this stuff and was shown to be very aware of how dangerous the world around him was. Now all of a sudden he's like, hey grandma, watch me almost get myself killed crossing this log over a fatal drop. This is not in any way the same character from the original movie. It has to be one of those alien dinosaurs who abducted the real Littlefoot and took his place. It would make as much sense as anything else in this dog shit, and for some reason they treat him like this great leader who's going to guide the Yellow Bellies and he's their only hope for salvation. He's like some kind of messiah to them. It gets really ridiculous. And aside from the characters being badly written, they're also badly voice acted. So many of the line deliveries are completely flat, and the characters sound way too high-pitched and cheerful. The worst of it easily being the Yellow Bellies that somehow had the audacity to involve talented actors like Cuba Gooding Jr. Why is he even here? Is he really just that desperate for a paycheck? Every single time one of them talks, it's like a toddler screaming in your ear. They're always speaking in a grating tone. They're always making loud noises. They're always making obnoxious sounds and needlessly yelling all their dialogue. It's so deafening to put up with, it's not even funny. It's just painful. And of course, it's not a Land Before Time sequel without those agonizing song numbers. They don't further the story or the characters in any meaningful way, so they're just there for the sake of having shitty songs. The vocal performances are terrible and the music is so dopey. There's no variety to how it's orchestrated. It's just obnoxious instruments making repetitive noises. Honestly, the entire movie score is like this. The music is completely soulless and just sounds like something you play for the entertainment of toddlers. The original movie score had so much impact and variety to it. It captured so many different emotions like fear and doubt and hope and comfort. The music in this movie doesn't have emotion. It's just cheerful and loud. There's no sense of balance to it, making the music insufferably dull and forgettable. And the stuff they sing about is so stupid and illiterate. The first one is about how you always have to listen to your parents, coming from the kids who are constantly disobeying their parents and running off into the unknown in every single one of these sequels. And then they immediately wander away from the Great Valley, not 10 minutes later, making the song completely pointless. The Yellow Belly song is completely obnoxious, where they just sing about having fun and having no plans in life and so much other basic preschool nonsense. I guess they're singing about enjoying life to its fullest, which might have worked if it wasn't coming from the most retarded dinosaurs in the world who are constantly getting themselves killed every 10 minutes. And oh no, Littlefoot suddenly feels sad about not being a good leader to the Yellow Bellies, so now he has to sing about it. Whoop-de shit. Littlefoot has no chemistry with them throughout the movie, so why should he even care? And just to make sure you don't forget this is a movie for babies, this movie has to constantly hammer in the wisdoms into your head as you're watching it. These wisdoms, as they're called, are said to be pieces of knowledge we use to survive in life. Which begs the question, why were these things never mentioned before in the other 12 movies? Don't you think the adults would have taught this to the kids by now after all the perils and dangers they put themselves in over the years? It might not have been so bad if it wasn't for the fact that all it amounts to is the most basic shit. Seriously, these wisdoms they keep bringing up throughout the movie are just basic everyday common knowledge stuff that you learn in kindergarten. Things like don't wander off, or don't play in the river, or don't cross a log over a ravine that could result in falling to your death, you absolute moron. They're not toddlers. They were shown to be smarter and more aware of the world around them in previous films. Why do they need these wisdoms taught to them? If Littlefoot is too stupid to know that walking over a ravine could result in his death, that's his fault. And why are they even called wisdoms? It's such a stupid name. They describe it like some sort of magic you have to put your faith in, not basic survival skills. And they repeat this so many times that it completely loses any and all meaning. The original movie was subtle about its messaging. It allowed the story and characters to teach these things to kids in a natural way. This movie is constantly smacking you in the face with it. They go on and on about the wisdoms in almost every single scene as if we didn't get it the first 27 times. The story structure is also completely abysmal. It is riddled with so much pointless filler that says nothing and does nothing. So many scenes and jokes that just waste your time with awful dialogue and drowned out laughter. The movie only has like 30 minutes of actual content. The rest is just meaningless noise. The pacing is horribly fast with extremely choppy editing and sloppy scene transitions. There's no rhyme or reason to anything that happens. It just jumps to the next scene without building it up properly. The Sharp Teeth aren't even a threat in this movie. They are the most pathetic and easily thwarted villains you can imagine. The way that they're defeated is so fucking contrived that you probably wouldn't believe it unless you saw it for yourself. The way the Sharp Teeth are defeated is by the Yellow Bellies making obnoxious noises. They make wailing sounds that are apparently so annoying that it causes them to back away in fear. And then the gang joins in and they start making noises to annoy them more. And the Sharp Teeth are actually threatened by this. They're all like, "Oh no, please make it stop, it's so unbearable. It's not like we can just bum rush you and maul you to death with our sharp teeth and powerful jaws. Oh, the agony." And then they just jump up and down until it causes the cliff they're standing on to fall. That's how the Sharp Teeth are defeated in this movie. Remember the tension and peril of the original where they actually had to think of a plan? Where the T-Rex was an actual threat and they had to combine all their unique techniques and abilities to defeat him? Fuck that shit. All you have to do now is just screech like a monkey and jump like a kangaroo. What a fucking load of horse shit. Oh, and speaking of shit, did I mention that there's actually toilet humor in this movie? Actual honest-to-God toilet humor in The Land Before Time. They didn't even have the decency to not scrap at that bottom of the barrel for this one. They had to include fucking toilet humor in The Land Before Time. Who greenlit this vile, grotesque piece of shit excuse for a sequel to a beloved classic? Who allowed this to see the light of day? Who? Fuck The Land Before Time 13, The Wisdom of Friends. Fuck the people who wrote it, fuck the people who directed it, and fuck Universal Studios for making it. Fuck them with an onslaught of aircraft missiles until their headquarters are a smoking pile of rubble. This movie is a fucking travesty and such a slap in the face to everything the original accomplished. The Land Before Time was a marvel of filmmaking. A movie made from a place of genuine passion. A movie that actually cared about adding something of value to the world. This movie is nothing like that at all. It's a shitty ploy by Universal Studios to bank on people's nostalgia like Disney with their horrible live-action remakes. Don't make the same mistake I made and avoid this movie like it's the plague. Never watch it for as long as you live or even after you die, because I promise you that nothing good will ever come out of it. Like I said before, I wouldn't recommend any of the Land Before Time sequels to people because I really don't have positive feelings towards any of them, but The Wisdom of Friends is just an entire other dimension of torture. Phew. Now that was an ordeal. So yeah, the world of animated sequels has definitely not been a good one. It really is a roller coaster of bullshit and nostalgia exploitation. Actually, it's fascinating how even after all this time, our disdain for them still remains fresh. These movies really are a disservice to the original, and putting them back to back really helps to expose how bad they are. But they can also be used to help shine a light on the originals. We can better appreciate how much thought was put into the world, story, and characters of these films. We may get some more bad sequels in the future, but the originals remain a timeless cornerstone of stories and imagination. We can always be thankful they were as good as they were, and how they avoided being brainless rot. From Ice Age to Surf's Up to The Land Before Time, you seriously can't beat the classics. And if you can't beat them, then simply don't make a follow-up to them, you idiots. A lesson that I hope will at least stick with people for years to come, and one that Hollywood will eventually get tired of ignoring. But until such a time comes, all we can do is wait. So until then, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.